Welcome to the AI Academy. In our last lecture, we covered the CISSP Domain 1, Security and Risk Management. In this lecture we are going to learn about the CISSP Domain 2, Access Control Systems. We'll dive into access control mechanisms, authentication, and authorization. So, let's begin. Imagine you walk into your office one morning and realize that anyone can enter the building, sit at any desk, access any computer, and read confidential emails. The receptionist doesn't check IDs, the doors are unlocked, and the network is open to the public. That would be a complete disaster, right? This is exactly why access control is required. Access control is the backbone of security in both the physical and digital world. It ensures that only authorized individuals can access specific locations, files, or systems while keeping everyone else locked out. In this section, we are going to explore access control in detail. By the end of this session, you will be able to understand what access control is and why it is critical for security. How the CIA triad helps maintain security. The threats, vulnerabilities, and risks that access control protects against. The differences between centralized and distributed architectures in access control. How security policies define and enforce access control in organizations. Let's take this step by step and really break it down so that you not only understand these concepts but can also explain them to someone else. So, what is access control and why is it important? Access control is the practice of restricting access to certain locations, information, or systems to authorized individuals only. Think of it like having a bouncer at a club. If your name is not on the list, you are not getting in. This concept applies to both physical and digital environments. The physical access control includes things like ID badges, security guards, locked doors, and fingerprint scanners at office buildings. And the logical access control deals with passwords, biometrics, encryption, and permissions on computer systems. Let's take a real-world example of the VIP club and online banking. Imagine there's an exclusive VIP club in your city. To enter, you need to show your membership card and verify your identity. If you're not on the list, you can't get in. Now, think about your online banking account. You log in with a username and password, maybe even a fingerprint scan. If someone else tries to log in without your credentials, they are denied access. These two examples illustrate how access control works in both the real world and the digital space. But why is this important? Because without access control, anyone could access anything, leading to data breaches, financial fraud, identity theft, and security risks. For companies, poor access control could mean that unauthorized employees accessing confidential files, hackers breaking into systems and stealing customer data, disgruntled employees modifying financial records, competitors gaining access to trade secrets. So, in summary, access control is essential for protecting sensitive information, maintaining trust, and ensuring compliance with regulations. Now, let's take this a step further and look at how security professionals structure access control using the CIA triad. In cybersecurity, everything boils down to three core principles of CIA triad. The confidentiality is about keeping information private and restricting access to authorized users only. The integrity is about ensuring that information remains unchanged and trustworthy. And the availability is about making sure authorized users can access information when they need it. Let's break these down with simple, real-world examples. Confidentiality. Think about your WhatsApp messages. When you send a message, it is encrypted, which means only the recipient can read it. This is confidentiality in action. Now, imagine a hospital's medical record system. If anyone could access patient records, that would be a serious violation of confidentiality. To maintain confidentiality, companies use encryption to protect sensitive data, access control lists to restrict who can see what, and multi-factor authentication to prevent unauthorized logins. Next is integrity. imagine you order a pizza online, but by the time it reaches the restaurant, someone changes your order from a cheese pizza to a pineapple pizza. That's a data integrity failure. In the digital world, hackers can modify data if strong integrity controls are not in place. To ensure data integrity, organizations use digital signatures to verify authenticity, audit logs to track changes, and hashing to prevent unauthorized modifications. And availability: what if you needed to withdraw cash, but every ATM in your city was offline? That's a failure of availability. In cybersecurity, companies maintain availability by using backup systems and redundancies, implementing disaster recovery plans, and protecting against denial-of-service attacks. So, whenever we talk about access control, always think about how it supports confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now that we understand what access control is and why it's important, let's discuss the security threats organizations face and how these threats can lead to real risks. What are we protecting against? Access control is designed to ensure that only authorized individuals can access sensitive systems and data. However, there are various ways attackers try to bypass these controls. Some common threats include unauthorized access. Hackers may steal passwords, exploit system weaknesses, or use brute force attacks to gain entry. Poorly configured security settings can make this easier. Insider threats. Not all security risks come from outside attackers. Employees with legitimate access may misuse their privileges to steal, modify, or leak sensitive information, either intentionally or unintentionally. Social engineering. Cybercriminals use deception to trick employees into revealing passwords or other confidential information through phishing emails, phone scams, or impersonation. Weak authentication. Simple passwords, such as password 123 or 123456, make it easy for attackers to guess credentials and gain unauthorized access. Malware attacks, viruses, ransomware, and other malicious software can exploit weak security controls, allowing attackers to bypass access restrictions and steal or encrypt sensitive data. Understanding threats, vulnerabilities, and risks. Each of these threats takes advantage of vulnerabilities' weaknesses within a system. A vulnerability could be outdated software, weak passwords, or employees who are not trained to recognize security threats. So, threat is a potential danger, such as a hacker attempting to steal data. And vulnerability is a weakness that an attacker could exploit, such as an employee using a weak password. And the risk is the likelihood of a threat successfully exploiting a vulnerability and causing harm, such as an attacker gaining access and stealing sensitive information. So, how security professionals mitigate these risks? To protect systems from access control threats, organizations implement various security measures, including multi-factor authentication, requiring additional verification methods, such as a one-time code or biometric authentication, strengthens security beyond just passwords. Strong encryption. Encrypting sensitive data ensures that even if an attacker gains access, they cannot read or misuse the information. Regular access audits. Monitoring and reviewing access logs help detect suspicious activities early and prevent unauthorized access. And employee training. Since human error is a common vulnerability, regular cybersecurity awareness training helps employees recognize and respond to social engineering attacks. Threats to access control are constantly evolving, but organizations can reduce risk by implementing strong authentication, encryption, monitoring, and employee awareness programs. By staying proactive, security teams can minimize the chances of unauthorized access and protect sensitive data effectively. Alright, let's talk about how organizations manage access control, because not all companies do it the same way. Imagine a company with hundreds of employees, multiple office locations, and cloud-based applications. How do they ensure the right people have access to the right systems? Well, there are two main approaches: centralized and distributed access control. With centralized access control, one system controls everything. Think of it like a command center for managing who gets access to what. For example, many companies use Microsoft Active Directory. Employees log into one central system, and based on their credentials, they get access to specific resources like email, databases, or shared drives. Why do companies like centralized access control? Because it's easier to manage, the IT teams don't have to maintain multiple security systems. It helps in applying consistent policies wherein everyone follows the same access rules across the organization. And provides better auditing since everything is controlled from one place, it's easier to track who accessed what. But some risks are also associated with it. If the central system is hacked, attackers could gain access to everything. Or a system failure could lock everyone out, causing major disruptions. Think of it like a castle with a single gate easy to guard, but if someone breaks through, they have access to everything inside. Now, let's flip the script. Some organizations prefer distributed access control, where each department or system manages its own access separately. For example, a company using multiple cloud services, AWS for development, Google Workspace for emails, and Salesforce for customer data. Each system has its own login credentials and access rules. So why to choose distributed access control? Because it provides more flexibility as each team or system sets access rules based on their specific needs. It also provides better isolation. If one system is compromised, it doesn't automatically expose everything else. But this too has challenges, like it is more difficult to manage. The IT teams have to juggle multiple systems, which can lead to inconsistencies. Harder to track and audit. There is no single view of who has access to what, making it easier for security gaps to appear. So, think of this approach like a city with multiple gates. If one is breached, the rest are still secure, but managing all the gates takes more effort. So, which one is better? There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Some companies prefer centralized access for easier management, while others choose distributed access for greater security. Many organizations use a hybrid approach, where key systems remain centrally controlled, but specialized applications have separate access controls. The key takeaway is that no matter which approach you use, strong authentication and regular access reviews are essential. This was just the foundation. We will now explore access control models, where we will learn exactly how organizations decide who gets access to what. Imagine you are the security manager for a large organization. You have thousands of employees, contractors, and third-party vendors. Not everyone should have the same level of access to sensitive information. But how do you decide who gets access and how do you enforce it? This is where access control models come into play. These models define the rules and structures that determine who is allowed to access certain resources and under what conditions. We will discuss about how mandatory access control, MAC, works in highly classified environments. Why discretionary access control is common but risky. How organizations use non-discretionary access control models like role-based access control, RBAC, task-based, and lattice-based models. What context-dependent and content-dependent access control means in real-world scenarios. How businesses adopt hybrid access control models to create flexible and secure access structures. Let's go step by step and break everything down. The mandatory access control. This model is used in environments where security is non-negotiable. Think of military, intelligence agencies, and government organizations. With MAC, users do not decide what they have access to. Instead, access is strictly controlled by system administrators and based on security classifications. Let's take a real-world example. The military classification system. Imagine you work at a top-secret government facility. Every document is classified under different security levels such as top secret, secret, confidential, unclassified. Employees are assigned a clearance level. If your clearance is secret, you can read secret and confidential documents, but you cannot access top secret files. Even if you have the right clearance, you still need a need-to-know basis access. Just because you have access does not mean you should be looking at that information unless your job requires it. Key features of MAC are that the users do not have control over their access rights. The access is based on security labels and clearance levels. And it is the most secure but also the least flexible. So, where is MAC used? It is best suited for military and government agencies, the law enforcement and intelligence services, and the highly classified research organizations. Because everything is centrally controlled, there is no room for human error, but it is also hard to manage in large organizations. Discretionary Access Control, DAC, which is the opposite of MAC. Here, users have the freedom to decide who gets access to what. For example, file sharing on your computer. Think about how you share files on your personal laptop. You can set a password for a folder, or decide who can view or edit a document or email a file to a colleague, giving them access. This is exactly how DAC works. The owner of the file or resource has full control over who can access it and what they can do with it. The key features of DAC are that the users control access permissions. It is the most flexible model. And it is also the most vulnerable to security risks. So, where is DAC used? The businesses that use file sharing systems, personal computers and home networks, or the corporate environments with dynamic access needs. While DAC is convenient, it also creates security risks. A user with full access can accidentally or intentionally share sensitive data, making DAC less secure than MAC. Now let's talk about non-discretionary access control, which removes user discretion and instead applies strict rules that are centrally managed. Like role-based access control, RBAC, one of the most widely used access control models today is role-based access control. For example, access in a hospital. Imagine you work in a hospital IT department. So, how access is structured there: the doctors can access patient records but not billing systems. The nurses can update patient information but cannot prescribe medications. And the administrative staff can handle billing but cannot see medical records. Access is based on job roles, not individual users. The key features of RBAC are that the permissions are assigned based on roles rather than individuals. It simplifies administration because security policies are role-based. And it reduces security risks by following the principle of least privilege. So, where is RBAC used? In corporate environments or in healthcare systems or in banking and finance. RBAC is extremely efficient and scalable, making it one of the most popular access control models in businesses today. The task-based access control is like RBAC, but instead of assigning permissions based on job roles, it assigns them based on specific tasks that need to be completed. For example, a user may be granted temporary access to a system only for the duration of a specific task and then lose access after completion. This is useful for contractors working on short-term projects, IT staff performing system maintenance, and the emergency response situations. The lattice-based access control is used in systems where access is defined by multiple levels of permissions. For example, think of corporate mergers where employees from one company must be given limited access to another company's systems. Access is determined by a hierarchy of privileges, allowing for granular control over information. We will now talk about the context-dependent and content-dependent access control. The context-dependent access control, this model grants access based on external conditions, such as time of day. Employees can only access data during work hours. Location, a login attempt from another country might trigger additional verification. And the device type, a company may block access to financial data from mobile phones. This is used for banking systems that require extra verification for large transactions. Remote access policies for employees. Cloud security where location-based restrictions apply. The content-dependent access control, in this model, access is determined by the actual content of the resource. For example, a user may only be able to see part of a financial report based on their seniority level. Or a customer support agent can view a client's contact details but not their payment information. This is used in healthcare, only showing necessary patient data to nurses. Finance, restricting visibility of high-value transactions. Or legal systems, allowing access based on case sensitivity. Hybrid approaches, most organizations do not rely on a single access control model. Instead, they combine different models to balance security and usability. For example, a government agency may use MAC for classified files but RBAC for employee access. And a bank may use DAC for document sharing but context-based access for online transactions. Hybrid models allow for greater flexibility while ensuring strict security where needed. Alright, let's get into one of the most fundamental and crucial aspects of access control, which is identification and authentication. This is where we decide who you are and whether we can trust you before allowing you access to a system or a resource. Think of it this way, if access control is like having a security guard at a club, then identification and authentication are the processes where the guard asks for your ID and verifies that it is real before letting you in. Identification methods, proving who you are. Identification is the first step in any access control system. It answers the question like, who are you? When you try to access a system, you provide an identifier, which could be a username or employee ID number, or a biometric scan such as a fingerprint or facial recognition, or a security token or a smart card. But the identification alone is not enough. Just because someone says they are John Doe does not mean they actually are John Doe. This is why we have authentication, which is the next step in the process. Authentication is about proving you are who you say you are. Authentication is the process of verifying that the identity claimed by the user is valid. Think of it like an airport security check. You hand over your passport, identification, but the security officer does not let you through until they verify it against their authentication system. In authentication, we use different types of verification methods, which we call authentication factors. Authentication factors have the three pillars of verification. To authenticate someone, we can use one or more of the following factors, something you know such as a password, PIN, or security question. This is the most common and the weakest form of authentication. Such as a password is a secret string of characters known only to the user. Or a PIN, personal identification number, is a short numeric code. The problem? Passwords can be stolen, guessed, or cracked. This is why modern security systems often require a second authentication factor to improve security. Something you have like a smart card, token, or a mobile phone with an authentication app. A security token is a physical device that provides authentication. Such as smart cards contain embedded microchips that store authentication credentials. Or one-time password, OTP, tokens generates a unique passcode that is valid for only a short time. Or mobile authentication apps like Google Authenticator and Microsoft Authenticator generate secure codes. The advantage is that even if someone steals your password, they cannot log in without your physical token. And something your biometrics such as fingerprints, retina scans, or facial recognition. Biometric authentication uses unique physical characteristics to verify identity. Examples include fingerprint scans, common in smartphones and office access systems. Or facial recognition, used in security cameras and airport immigration systems. Or retina or iris scans, used in high-security facilities. The main advantage of biometrics are that you cannot lose them, and they are difficult to fake. However, biometrics can sometimes produce errors. Now that we have covered identification and authentication, it is time to move to the next important step, authorization. Let's say you walk into an office building. You show your ID badge at the entrance, and security verifies your identity, that is authentication. But now, can you enter the server room? Can you log into the CEO's email account? Can you approve financial transactions? The answer is no, unless you have been authorized to do so. That is exactly what authorization is all about. It determines what actions you are allowed to perform after you have been authenticated. Understanding authorization, the power of permissions. Imagine you work at a large bank. You and your colleague both log into the same system, but you have different levels of access, such as, you can view financial reports, but cannot edit them. Your manager can edit reports but cannot approve large transactions. And the finance director can approve high-value transactions. Even though everyone logs into the same system, they have different permissions based on their job roles. The authorization controls access based on who you are, what department you belong to, and what actions you need to perform. Now, let's explore how these permissions are managed in real-world systems. Access Control Lists, ACLs. An access control list is like a guest list at an exclusive event. It defines who is allowed access and what they are allowed to do. In technical terms, an ACL is a list of rules that specifies which users or systems can access a specific resource and what actions they can perform. A real-world example would be the file permissions. Think about the permissions on a shared Google Drive folder, such as, Alice can read, edit, and delete files. Bob can only view files. And Charlie is denied access completely. This is an ACL in action. The system checks the user's identity and matches it against the ACL before allowing or denying access. So, where are ACLs used? The file systems like Windows NTFS permissions or Linux file permissions. Network devices such as a firewall, rules that allow or block traffic. And databases for restricting access to sensitive records. Security tokens and digital certificates. While ACLs define what you can do, security tokens and digital certificates play a major role in verifying your authorization in secure environments. What are security tokens? A security token is a physical or digital device used to prove that a user is authorized to access a system. Tokens work by storing authentication and authorization credentials that are verified by the system. Types of security tokens are like physical security tokens, USB keys, smart cards, RFID badges. Or one-time password tokens, generate time-sensitive codes using Google Authenticator, or RSA Secure ID. And software tokens were secure applications that store authentication credentials. A real-world example is smart cards for employee access. Many companies issue smart cards to employees. These cards contain a security chip that stores their credentials and access rights. The employees scan their smart card at the office entrance. The system checks the credentials stored on the card. If valid, access is granted. This prevents unauthorized access and ensures that only authorized personnel can enter restricted areas. The digital certificates. A digital certificate is a cryptographic document that proves a user, device, or website is legitimate. Digital certificates are used in web security, such as SSL or TLS certificates for HTTPS websites, email encryption, and securing corporate networks. Think of it like a digital passport that proves you are authorized to interact with a system securely. How digital certificates work in authorization. So when a user requests access to a secure system, the system checks the user's digital certificate. And if the certificate is valid and trusted, access is granted. For example, when you visit a banking website, your browser checks the bank's SSL certificate before allowing a secure connection. If the certificate is missing or expired, you get a security warning. Now let's talk about privileged access management. Some accounts have higher access privileges than others. These include system administrators who can modify server settings and access user accounts. The database administrators who can edit and delete sensitive company records. And the finance executives who can approve high-value transactions. These accounts require extra protection because if they are compromised, they could cause severe damage. Privileged access management is a security strategy that protects high-privilege accounts from misuse, abuse, and cyber attacks. PAM works by limiting access to privileged accounts, requiring additional authentication before using a privileged account, automatically monitoring and logging all privileged account activity, using just-in-time access, where privileged access is granted temporarily. A real-world example is like temporary administrator privileges. Let's say an IT technician needs administrator access to install software on company computers. With PAM, they can request temporary administrator privileges. The system grants access for a limited time. And once the job is done, their admin privileges are revoked. This prevents permanent high-level access and reduces the risk of privilege abuse. So, why is PAM critical? It reduces insider threats by limiting who can access critical systems. It prevents privilege escalation attacks, where hackers try to gain admin access. And ensures compliance with security regulations. Alright, now that we have covered how users are identified, authenticated, and authorized, let's talk about the technologies that make all of this work in the real world. Every organization, from small businesses to global enterprises, relies on access control technologies to ensure that only the right people can access the right resources at the right time. Imagine you work for a company with thousands of employees across multiple locations. Every day, employees need to log into their computers, access company databases, connect to cloud applications, and use internal tools. Now, imagine if they had to remember a different password for every system and log in separately to each one. It would be a complete nightmare, for both employees and IT administrators. That is why companies use access control technologies to make authentication and authorization more efficient, secure, and manageable. Let's get started by talking about Single Sign-On, SSO, and why it is a game changer for enterprise security. Single sign-on, one login to rule. Think about how many different accounts you use every day: your work email, your cloud storage account, your HR portal, your project management tool. Now, imagine having to log in separately to each of them every day. It would be inconvenient as too many passwords to remember, time-consuming, wasting time entering credentials repeatedly, and less secure. Employees might reuse passwords or write them down. This is where Single Sign-On comes in. Single Sign-On is a technology that allows a user to log in once and gain access to multiple applications without needing to re-authenticate. It works by using a central authentication system that verifies the user's identity and grants access to authorized applications. So, how does SSO work? The user logs in once using their credentials. The SSO system authenticates them and issues a secure token. When the user accesses another application, the token is checked and validated. If valid, the user is granted access without needing to log in again. SSO is used in enterprise environments, cloud applications, and federated systems. Now, let's talk about some SSO mechanisms and how they work. Several technologies make SSO possible. Here are 4 major SSO mechanisms used in enterprise environments. Kerberos. What is Kerberos? Kerberos is an SSO authentication protocol developed by MIT and widely used in enterprise networks. It uses tickets and encryption to verify user identities securely. How Kerberos works: the user logs in with a username and password. Next, the Kerberos issues a ticket that proves the user's identity. Then this ticket is used to access multiple services without requiring a new login. Where is Kerberos used? Windows Active Directory. Most Windows networks use Kerberos, enterprise networks, and cloud authentication systems. Second is Sesame, a European alternative to Kerberos. Sesame, Secure European System for Applications in a Multi-Vendor Environment, is another SSO protocol that works similarly to Kerberos but adds extra security features like public key cryptography. Sesame is not as commonly used today, but it was designed to address some of Kerberos's weaknesses. Kryptonite, IBM's authentication system. Kryptonite is an authentication system developed by IBM that supports peer-to-peer authentication and SSO capabilities. Unlike Kerberos, which has a centralized key distribution center, KDC, Kryptonite supports distributed authentication, making it more flexible in certain environments. NetSP, secure authentication for IBM systems. NetSP, Network Security Program, is another IBM security framework that supports SSO and strong authentication for enterprise networks. It provides secure identity verification and is designed to work in multi-vendor environments, ensuring compatibility across different platforms. In addition to SSO mechanisms, organizations use authentication protocols to verify user credentials securely. Here are three of the most widely used authentication protocols. Radius, Remote Authentication Dial-in User Service. The Radius is an authentication and accounting protocol used to manage remote access. How Radius works: when a user connects to a network device, like a VPN or Wi-Fi network, the network device forwards the login request to the Radius server. The Radius server checks the credentials and responds with either access granted or denied. The Radius is used for Wi-Fi authentication, used by large companies and universities, or VPN authentication or ISP in telecom networks. CHAP, Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol. The CHAP is an authentication protocol that uses a challenge response mechanism to verify a user's identity. In CHAP, the server sends a challenge number to the client. Then the client responds with an encrypted version of the challenge using their password. And the server verifies the response and grants access if it matches the expected value. This prevents attackers from replaying stolen credentials since each challenge is unique. TCACS and TCACS Plus, secure authentication for network devices. The TCACS and its improved version TCACS Plus are used to authenticate network administrators accessing routers, switches, and firewalls. TCACS Plus is more secure than TCACS because it uses stronger encryption, separates authentication, authorization, and accounting, also called as AAA functions, and supports multi-factor authentication. The TCACS Plus is commonly used in enterprise networking environments, or data centers or cloud security infrastructure. Now that we have covered how access control technologies work, it is time to talk about something just as important: controls in access control. Think of controls as the rules, mechanisms, and safeguards that keep access control systems effective and secure. Just because a system has authentication and authorization in place does not mean it is completely safe. We need additional layers of security to prevent, detect, and correct security issues. Imagine a bank. It does not just rely on a locked door to keep criminals out. It has CCTV cameras to monitor activity, alarm systems to detect break-ins, and security guards to respond to threats. Access control in cybersecurity works the same way. We have different types of security controls that work together to keep systems protected from unauthorized access, misuse, and security breaches. Security controls protect access control systems by preventing, detecting, or responding to security threats. There are three main types of security controls, such as preventive controls to stop security incidents before they happen, detective controls to identify and record security incidents when they occur, and corrective controls to take action to recover and fix security issues. Let's look at each of these in more detail. The preventive controls are focused on stopping problems before they happen. The preventive controls are proactive. Their goal is to stop threats before they can cause harm. Imagine a locked door at a restricted area. If someone without authorization tries to enter, they cannot get in. That is a preventive control in action. Examples of preventive controls are strong password policies, ensuring users create strong, complex passwords. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, requiring more than just a password to log in. Firewalls for blocking unauthorized traffic from entering the network. Role-based access control, RBAC, ensuring only authorized users have access to certain data. Encryption for protecting sensitive information from being read by unauthorized users. The goal of preventive controls is to reduce the chances of a security incident happening. The detective controls are meant for catching problems when they happen. Detective controls do not stop attacks, but they alert security teams when something suspicious happens. Think of CCTV cameras in a bank. They do not prevent a robbery, but they record footage of the event, helping identify the criminals. Examples of detective controls are intrusion detection systems, IDS, monitor network traffic and flag suspicious activity. Security event logging, keeping records of who accessed what and when. User activity monitoring, tracking user behavior to detect unusual actions. And audit trails for keeping a log of all system changes to investigate security incidents. Detective controls help security teams detect and respond to threats quickly. The corrective controls are about fixing problems after they happen. Corrective controls help recover from security incidents. Their goal is to minimize damage and restore normal operations. Think of a fire extinguisher. It does not prevent a fire, but it helps control the damage once a fire has started. Examples of corrective controls are incident response plans, outlining steps to take after a security breach. Disaster recovery plans, DRP, ensuring systems can be restored after an attack. Account lockouts, automatically disabling compromised accounts to stop further damage. And patching and updates, fixing vulnerabilities after an attack is detected. Corrective controls help mitigate the damage and restore security after an incident. Now that we understand the three types of controls, let's talk about the three main categories of controls. Security controls can be administrative focus on policies and procedures to manage security risks. Logical, technical, such as utilize technology to protect information systems, or physical to implement tangible measures to secure facilities and assets. Administrative controls, the policies and procedures that keep security in check. Now, let's shift our focus to administrative controls, the policies, procedures, and rules that form the backbone of an organization's security strategy. Why do administrative controls matter? Because technology alone isn't enough to secure an organization. You can have the best firewalls, biometric authentication, and encryption, but if employees don't follow security procedures, the whole system falls apart. Think about this: who decides who gets access to what? Who sets the rules for passwords, training, and security checks? That's where administrative controls come in. So, what are administrative controls? Administrative controls are the policies and procedures that define how access control should be enforced. They focus on human behavior, security awareness, and accountability, ensuring that security measures are used correctly. Think of administrative controls as the rulebook for security. They tell employees that what they can and cannot access, how they should authenticate themselves, what to do if they detect a security threat, and how access rights are assigned, monitored, and revoked. While technical and physical controls enforce security, administrative controls guide and regulate them. Let's break down some of the most important administrative controls with real-world examples. Security awareness training, educating employees on cybersecurity risks. No matter how advanced your security systems are, human error is still the #1 cause of data breaches. Employees must be trained to recognize and respond to threats like phishing, social engineering, and weak passwords. For example, a company conducts monthly cybersecurity training to teach employees how to spot phishing emails. And employees participate in simulated phishing attacks, where they receive fake scam emails. Those who fall for them are given extra training. Why this is important: prevent social engineering attacks so that employees don't fall for scams. Reduces security mistakes such as less password sharing, fewer weak passwords. and creates a security-aware culture due to which employees feel responsible for security. The best practice states that the security awareness training should be ongoing, not just a one-time event. The access control policies, defining who can access what. Every organization must have a clear access control policy that defines who is allowed to access which systems and data. How is access granted, modified, or revoked? And what authentication methods are required? For example, in a hospital, only doctors and nurses can access patient records, while IT staff can only access system configurations. The employees must use multi-factor authentication when accessing systems remotely. And if an employee leaves the company, their access must be revoked immediately. Why this is important as it prevents unauthorized access and data breaches. Ensures compliance with regulations like HIPAA and GDPR. And helps to track and audit access to sensitive information. The best practice is that the access control policies should follow the principle of least privilege, in which the users only get access to what they absolutely need. Separation of duties, like preventing one person from having too much control. Separation of duties ensures that no single person has enough access to abuse a system. For example, in a bank, the employee who requests a financial transaction is not the same person who approves it. And in an IT department, the administrator who grants user permissions but cannot audit access logs. Why this is important as it prevents fraud and insider threats. Reduces the risk of abuse of power or unauthorized changes. And ensures checks and balances in security processes. The best practice is to always have multiple layers of approval for critical actions. Regular security audits, ensuring compliance and detecting weaknesses. A security audit is a formal review of an organization's access control policies and security measures. For example, every quarter, the IT team reviews all user accounts to check for inactive or unnecessary accounts. The finance department conducts audits to ensure that employees only access the financial data they need. And if an employee logs into a system at an unusual time, the audit team investigates whether it's a security threat. Why this is important as it helps identify security gaps before attackers do. Ensures compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. And provides accountability, all access is tracked and reviewed. The best practice is the security audits should be automated wherever possible using logging and monitoring tools. Other important administrative controls are like background checks and employee screening. Before hiring new employees, companies screen for criminal records or cybersecurity risks. Incident response plans. If a security breach happens, there must be a clear procedure for containing and resolving it. And data classification policies. Organizations must classify data based on sensitivity, public, confidential, highly sensitive, and enforce strict access controls. Think of administrative controls as the foundation that holds all security measures together. Without clear policies, procedures, and training, even the most advanced security systems can fail. Now that we've covered administrative controls, the rules and policies that govern security, it's time to talk about logical or technical controls. The technological tools and systems enforces security automatically, reducing the risk of human error and ensuring consistent protection. Why are logical controls important? As humans make mistakes, but the security technology enforces rules without fail. The attackers are getting smarter, and the logical controls act as the first line of defense. The organizations handle sensitive data without encryption, firewalls, and authentication. It would be too easy to steal data. Let's start with the firewall. It's an perimeter security device that has been securing networks for decades. Think of a firewall as a security guard standing at the entrance of a building. It decides who is allowed in and who gets blocked. The firewalls monitors and filters incoming and outgoing network traffic. They enforce security rules to block unauthorized access. And firewalls prevent cyber attacks like hacking, malware, and denial of service attacks. There are various types of firewalls such as packet filtering firewalls. It checks the incoming data packets and allow or block them based on rules. The stateful inspection firewalls, they track active network sessions and allow only trusted connections. And the next generation firewalls, it uses AI and deep packet inspection to detect advanced threats. For example, a company's firewall blocks all traffic from unknown IP addresses to prevent hacking attempts. Why firewalls matters, as it prevent unauthorized access to networks and systems. It filter out malware before it reaches internal systems. And monitor network traffic to detect suspicious activity. The best practice is that firewalls should always be updated and configured correctly to keep up with new threats. Next is encryption. Imagine you're sending a letter through the mail. If it's not in an envelope, anyone can read it. Encryption is like sealing that letter in a locked box and only the right person can open it. So, what is encryption? The encryption scrambles data so that only authorized users with the right decryption key can read it. For example, when you enter your credit card information online, it's encrypted before being sent, preventing hackers from stealing it. Or the emails between employees can be encrypted so that only the intended recipient can read them. The types of encryptions are symmetric encryption, in which the same key is used to encrypt and decrypt data. For example, AES is used in banking. Asymmetric encryption, it uses a public key to encrypt and a private key to decrypt. For example, RSA encryption, used in secure email communications. So, why encryption matters, as it protects sensitive data even if it's stolen. It ensures confidentiality in communication and storage. And helps organizations meet compliance standards like GDPR, HIPAA, and PCI DSS. The best practice is that always use strong encryption and regularly update keys to prevent decryption by hackers. Next is access control lists. The access control lists restrict what users and devices are allowed to do on a system. Think of an ACL as a guest list at a private event. If your name isn't on the list, you can't get in. How ACLs work: the ACLs define who has permission to access specific files, applications, or network resources. They specify what actions users can perform, like read, write, or execute. For example, an ACL in a company's database allows only finance employees to access payroll records. Or an IT administrator configures ACLs to ensure that only specific IP addresses can access company servers. So, why ACLs matters, as it prevents unauthorized access to sensitive systems. It also reduces the risk of accidental or intentional data modification. And improves security by enforcing the principle of least privilege. The best practice is to regularly review and update ACLs to ensure employees have only the minimum necessary access. Next is biometric authentication. The passwords can be stolen, guessed, or forgotten. Biometric authentication solves this problem by using unique physical traits to verify identity. Types of biometric authentication are fingerprint scanners used in smartphones and workplace security systems. Or facial recognition used in AI-driven security cameras and mobile phone authentication. Or retina or iris scanning. It is highly secure but less commonly used. Or voice recognition. It is used for call centers and smart assistants. For example, an employees use fingerprint authentication to enter a secure research facility. Or a banking app allows users to log in using facial recognition instead of a password. So, why biometric authentication matters? As it is harder to forge or steal compared to passwords. It increases convenience while maintaining strong security. And provides multi-factor authentication when combined with PINs or passwords. The best practice is to use biometric authentication along with another security factor such as a password or security token. So, the logical controls automate and enforce security, reducing human error and protecting systems from cyber threats. The firewalls act as a gatekeeper, blocking unauthorized network access. The encryption protects sensitive data from hackers and unauthorized access. The ACLs define user permissions, preventing data leaks. And the biometric authentication enhances security by using unique physical traits. These technical security measures work together to create a strong, automated defense system for any organization. Alright, we've talked a lot about cybersecurity, such as firewalls, encryption, and authentication. But here's the thing, that none of it matters if an attacker can physically walk into your office, access a server, and steal data. This is why physical security controls are just as important as technical ones. Let's think about some real-world scenarios, like, if someone steals a company laptop, what happens to the sensitive data on it? Or if an attacker walks into a data center and plugs in a rogue device, how secure is the network? Or if a thief breaks into a server room, does encryption really help if the hardware itself is gone? This is why physical security exists, as it stops unauthorized individuals from gaining access to critical systems. Let's start with the human layer of protection, which is security guards. Technology is great, but sometimes, you still need actual people to enforce security. Security guards act as the first level of defense by checking IDs before allowing entry, monitoring security cameras for unusual activity, responding to unauthorized access attempts, and escorting visitors and ensuring they don't wander into restricted areas. For example, a data center hires security guards to protect its facility. Anyone entering the building must show valid identification. They have an approved visitor pass, and be escorted when entering restricted areas. Why are security guards effective? As they provide real-time threat response, unlike cameras, they can take immediate action. And they prevent social engineering attacks, where someone pretends to be an employee or visitor to gain access. The best practice is that security guards should be trained in cybersecurity awareness to recognize social engineering tactics. CCTV surveillance. The CCTV cameras provide constant surveillance over key areas like building entrances and exits, data centers and server rooms, and workspaces where sensitive documents are handled. For example, a financial company uses AI-enhanced CCTV cameras that recognize faces and match them to employee records. Alert security teams if someone is in a restricted area after hours, and automatically flag suspicious movements, like someone tampering with a locked door. Why is CCTV important? Because they deter crime. If people know they're being recorded, they're less likely to attempt unauthorized access. They provide evidence. If an incident occurs, security teams can review footage to investigate and monitor security threats in real time. AI-powered cameras can detect anomalies and send alerts instantly. The best practice is that CCTV cameras should be placed in strategic locations, not just at entrances, but also inside sensitive areas like server rooms. Man-traps. A man-trap is a small, enclosed area with two sets of interlocking doors. The first door must close before the second door can open, ensuring only one person enters at a time. Why we should use man-traps? As it prevents tailgating. Someone cannot follow an employee into a secure area without proper authentication. It requires multi-step authentication. Employees may need to scan a badge and do biometric authentication inside the man-trap. And it creates a security buffer. If someone enters without authorization, the system locks both doors, trapping the intruder inside. For example, in a high-security government facility, employees must scan an access card to enter the man-trap. Wait for the system to verify their credentials. And once approved, the second door unlocks, allowing entry. The best practice is that man-traps should be used in high-security areas, like research labs, data centers, and executive offices. Locks and access badges. At the most basic level, locks and badges control who can physically enter a facility. The types of locks are traditional key locks, simple but easy to bypass if keys are lost or copied. Keycard/RFID locks. employees scan a badge to unlock doors. Biometric locks require fingerprint or facial recognition for access. And smart locks with multi-factor authentication combine PINs, biometrics, and access cards for enhanced security. For example, a corporate headquarters issues employees RFID-enabled access badges that grant access only to assigned floors and rooms. Log entry and exit times for auditing. And automatically disable lost or stolen cards. The best practice is that access badges should expire after a set period and require re-verification for continued access. Physical security in data centers. The data centers require specialized physical controls because they house critical IT equipment. The key data center security measures are like restricted access. Only IT administrators can enter. Temperature and humidity controls that prevents overheating. Raised floors and water detection sensors to protect against floods. And backup power generators to ensure continuous operation during power failures. For example, a cloud computing company secures its data centers with armed security guards, 24/7 video monitoring, and multi-factor authentication for entry like badge and fingerprint scan. The best practice is that the data centers should have redundant security layers, including fire suppression systems and emergency shutdown procedures. A strong physical security strategy ensures that even if someone tries to bypass digital defenses, they can't physically access critical systems. Control combinations and pairings, layered security. Now, let's talk about how different security controls work together to create layered security. Think about security like protecting a medieval castle. A castle doesn't just have one defense, it has walls, guards, a moat, and watchtowers. If an attacker breaches one layer, another layer is ready to stop them before they reach the treasure. The same principle applies to modern cybersecurity. Organizations don't rely on just one security measure, they combine different types of controls to ensure that if one fails, another will catch the threat. This is called defense in depth, and it's one of the most effective ways to protect systems, data, and networks. Let's break this down with real-world examples of how different controls work together. Step 1. Preventive and technical control, which is about stopping the attack before it happens. This is the first line of defense. The goal here is to stop the hacker before they even get inside. For example, the firewall blocks unauthorized traffic. Imagine the hacker is trying to access the company's internal systems by scanning for weaknesses. The firewall is set up to block all traffic from untrusted IP addresses. And if the hacker tries to brute force login credentials, the firewall detects the suspicious traffic pattern and blocks the connection. Why is this effective? The firewall prevents unauthorized users from accessing internal systems. It stops common cyber threats before they can do any harm. Now, let's say the hacker is smart. They find a way to bypass the firewall, maybe by using a stolen set of login credentials. This is where the next layer of security kicks in. Step 2. Detective and technical control, which is about catching the threat in progress. At this point, the hacker has bypassed the firewall and is inside the network. The company now needs a way to detect this unauthorized activity before it gets worse. For example, the intrusion detection system spots the hacker. The company has an intrusion detection system actively monitoring network activity. The IDS detects unusual login attempts from an unknown device and logs the suspicious activity. The system sends an alert to the security team. Why is this effective? It provides real-time detection of threats that have bypassed preventive controls. It allows security teams to respond before major damage occurs. Without this detective control, the hacker could move freely inside the network without being noticed. Now that an alert has been triggered, it is time for the security team to take action. Step 3. Corrective and administrative control, which is responding to the attack. Now that the IDS has detected suspicious activity, it is time for the security team to take action and contain the attack. For example, the incident response team analyzes the logs and confirms the attack. They block the attacker's IP address, disable the compromised account, and investigate further. And if needed, they restore affected systems from backups to remove any traces of the attack. Why is this effective? It ensures that security teams respond quickly to minimize damage. It helps identify weaknesses in security controls, so the company can fix them before another attack happens. At this point, the attack has been neutralized, and the company can focus on preventing a similar attack in the future. Why layered security is the best approach? The problem is that no single security control is foolproof. Hackers are always finding ways around defenses. If you only rely on a firewall, an attacker could use stolen credentials to bypass it. If you only use an IDS, but have no incident response team, an attacker could still do damage before anyone responds. This is why layered security is the best approach. Each layer has a specific role, such as preventive controls like firewalls block attacks before they happen. The detective controls like IDS catch threats that bypass preventive controls. And the corrective controls like incident response teams neutralize the threat and fix any damage. Organizations must continuously test, update, and improve their security controls. Cyber threats are always evolving, so security must adapt and stay ahead of attackers. A hacker only needs one weakness to break in, but a well-designed layered security system makes sure there are no easy targets. Now, we will talk about intrusion detection and prevention systems, and how they help detect and stop cyber threats. So far, we have talked about how access control works, how users are authenticated, and how security controls are implemented. The IDS and IPS monitor your network and systems for suspicious activity, helping detect and stop cyber threats. So, what is an intrusion detection system or IDS? An intrusion detection system is a security tool that monitors traffic and system activity to detect signs of unauthorized access, attacks, or policy violations. Unlike firewalls, which block incoming threats, an IDS does not stop attacks, it only detects and alerts security teams about them. Imagine an IDS as a silent security guard watching everything that happens in your network. If it notices something suspicious like an unauthorized login attempt or unusual data transfer, it alerts administrators so they can take action. Why is IDS important? As it is an early warning system which helps detect attacks before they cause major damage. Monitors all traffic as it scans both external and internal network traffic. Identifies suspicious behavior, detects malware, hackers, and even insider threats. And provides forensic data which keeps logs of all suspicious activity for investigation and auditing. Now, let's look at the two main types of IDS, the network-based IDS, NIDS, and the host-based IDS, HIDS. A network-based IDS is placed at key points in a network such as near firewalls or gateways to monitor all incoming and outgoing traffic. How does NIDS work? It analyzes packets moving across the network. It looks for attack patterns in the data. And if it detects a suspicious activity like a denial-of-service attack or data exfiltration, it raises an alert. The key features of NIDS are that, monitors all network traffic in real time. Detects external attacks, such as hackers trying to break into a system. And can identify DOS attacks, port scanning, and unauthorized access attempts. A NIDS works by inspecting network, it checks packet headers for signs of spoofing, abnormal patterns, or malware signatures. It looks at packet payloads, the actual data, to detect malicious content. This helps security teams identify attacks before they reach the target system. One of the most common cyber attacks is a denial-of-service attack, where attackers flood a network with so much traffic that it crashes the system. A NIDS can detect DOS attempts by identifying unusual spikes in traffic, multiple failed login attempts or repeated access requests from a single source. While a NIDS cannot stop a DOS attack, it alerts security teams so they can take action, such as blocking the attacker's IP address or rerouting traffic. The host-based IDS, HIDS, is installed on individual devices, servers, computers, or workstations, to monitor activity at the system level. How does HIDS work? It analyzes system logs for unusual behavior. It monitors file integrity, checking for unauthorized modifications. And it detects malicious activity, such as malware infections or privilege escalation. The key features of HIDS are that it monitors system activity in logs, detects insider threats such as an employee trying to access restricted files, and identifies malware infections that might not be detected at the network level. While NIDS watches the network, HIDS watches the device itself, providing another layer of security. Let's now talk about the IDS detection methods. The intrusion detection systems use two main detection methods. 1. Signature-based detection, knowledge-based ID. It compares network traffic and system activity against a database of known attack signatures. It works like antivirus software, detecting attacks based on predefined patterns. And fast and accurate, but cannot detect new, zero-day, attacks. 2. Anomaly-based detection, behavior-based ID. It uses machine learning and statistical analysis to detect unusual activity. Flags traffic that deviates from normal behavior. Can detect new, zero-day, attacks, but may generate false positives. For example, if an employee suddenly starts accessing thousands of files in 1 hour, an anomaly-based IDS would flag this as suspicious. We will now discuss about the database security and access control. This is a crucial aspect of cybersecurity that often does not get the attention it deserves. Many organizations focus heavily on network security, firewalls, and endpoint protection, but fail to realize that the most valuable asset they are trying to protect is the data itself. Let's take a moment to think about it. What is an organization really protecting? Yes, we secure networks, applications, and infrastructure, but at the core of everything lies data, customer records, financial transactions, trade secrets, and confidential business information. Now, imagine an attacker bypasses all external defenses and gains access to an organization's database. They could steal customer information, leading to identity theft and legal consequences. They could alter financial records, which might cause severe financial losses. They could delete critical data, potentially destroying years of work. A database breach is often more damaging than hacking into a website or network. That is why organizations must implement strong database security to ensure that only authorized users can access specific data. Data integrity is maintained so that information is accurate and consistent. And unauthorized changes or deletions are prevented. Before diving into security measures, let's first understand how relational databases work. A relational database is a structured way of storing data in tables. These tables are connected by relationships, allowing data to be stored efficiently without duplication. Each table consists of rows, also known as records, and each row represents an individual data entry. And columns, also known as attributes, and each column represents a characteristic of the data. Let's take a banking system as an example. The database might have a customers table like this. It includes customer ID, name, account number, and balance. Now, imagine what could happen if this database is not properly secured. For example, Alice modifies Bob's balance and transfers his money to her account. And a hacker deletes all customer records, erasing account history. Or an unauthorized employee views sensitive customer details. To prevent these issues, relational databases enforce security measures like entity integrity, referential integrity, and data normalization. Let's now understand the entity integrity, ensuring unique and accurate data. Entity integrity ensures that every record in a database table has a unique identifier, known as a primary key. For example, in our bank database, the customer ID column must be unique. No two customers can have the same ID. And it also should not be empty. Every customer must have an ID. If this rule is violated, the transactions could get mixed up if two customers share the same ID. And if a customer ID is missing, the system might not be able to retrieve or update the record properly. Entity integrity helps maintain the accuracy and reliability of data. Let's now talk about the referential integrity. Most databases consist of multiple related tables. Referential integrity ensures that these relationships remain consistent and meaningful. For example, transactions linked to customers. Let's say our banking system has another table for transactions. It will have the transaction ID, customer ID, amount and type for deposit or withdrawal. Here, the customer ID in the transactions table is a foreign key, meaning it must correspond to a valid customer ID in the customers table. What happens if referential integrity is not enforced? A transaction could reference a non-existent customer. And the database could contain orphaned records that no longer relate to anything. To prevent these issues, databases use foreign keys, which ensure that a customer cannot be deleted if they have associated transactions. And every transaction is linked to a valid customer. We will now look into the data normalization. It's about reducing data redundancy and enhancing security. So, the data normalization is a technique that structures data efficiently to eliminate duplicate information and ensure that each piece of data is stored in one place. For example, the address data in a customer database, instead of storing customer addresses in multiple tables, a separate addresses table is created and linked to the customers table using foreign keys. It will have columns like address ID, customer ID, street, and city. The security benefits of normalization are that it prevents inconsistencies so that there are no conflicting records across different tables are present. It minimizes unauthorized modifications as all the data is updated in one place. And improves database performance as in the consistent database the queries and updates run faster. So the data normalization enhances both security and efficiency. So, restricting what users can see, because not every user needs access to all data. Database views allow administrators to control what information users can see and modify. For example, a bank teller does not need access to a customer's social security number. They only need basic details like name and balance. A database view can restrict access like this so that they can view name and balance only from the entire data having other critical information. The security benefits of restricted views are that the users can only see the data they need, enforcing the need-to-know principle. It prevents direct access to sensitive tables. And adds an extra layer of access control. Views act as a security filter, preventing users from seeing or modifying restricted data. A database is the most critical asset in an organization's information system. If it is not properly secured, the hackers can steal or manipulate data. Or insiders can access sensitive information they should not see. Or data corruption can disrupt business operations. That is why relational database security ensures that the data remains accurate and trustworthy using entity integrity. And the relationships between records stay consistent using referential integrity. And the information is stored efficiently and securely using normalization techniques. And users only access the data they need using views and access control. Alright, now let's focus on SQL security mechanisms, one of the most critical aspects of database security. Since most databases use structured query language, SQL, to store, retrieve, and manage data, attackers often try to exploit vulnerabilities in SQL-based systems. Think about it. An organization's most valuable data, customer records, financial transactions, employee details, are all stored in databases. If an attacker finds a way to manipulate SQL queries, they can steal data, modify records, or even delete entire databases. That is why securing SQL databases is not optional, it is essential. Let's start with the biggest database security threat, the SQL injection. The SQL injection, or SQLI, is one of the most common and dangerous database attacks. It happens when an attacker manipulates a SQL query to gain unauthorized access to a database. This can allow hackers to bypass login authentication, steal sensitive data, modify or delete records, or execute administrative commands on the database. A simple example of how SQL injection works: imagine a website login form where users enter their username and password. The system checks the database like this. Example of an insecure SQL query. Select from users where username equals Alice and password equals password 123. Now, let's say a hacker enters this malicious input instead of a valid username, or 1 is equal to 1 dash dash. This would modify the SQL query to select from users where username equals, or 1 is equal to 1 dash dash and password equals double quote. What just happened? The or 1 is equal to 1 trick forces the query to return all users. Since 1 is equal to 1 is always true, the system logs the attacker in without requiring a password. The dash dash symbol comments out the rest of the SQL query, preventing further validation. This means the attacker has just bypassed authentication without knowing any passwords. Example of real-world SQL injection is that the SQL injection attacks have caused major data breaches in history. In one well-known case, attackers used SQL injection to steal millions of customer records from a major company. Hackers injected malicious SQL queries into a website form. The attack gave them full access to customer names, addresses, credit card details, and passwords. The company suffered financial losses and legal penalties. This is why SQL injection remains a top cybersecurity threat. How to prevent SQL injection? 1. Use bind variables, prevent input manipulation. One of the best ways to stop SQL injection is to use bind variables. Let's compare an insecure and a secure way of handling user input. Insecure SQL query which is vulnerable to SQL injection. Select asterisk from users where username equals, plus user underscore input plus double quote, and password equals, plus password underscore input plus double quote. If an attacker enters, or 1 is equal to 1 dash dash as input, the query gets manipulated. To secure SQL query using bind variables, use. Select asterisk from users where username equals question mark and password equals question mark. What is happening here? The question mark placeholders ensure that input is treated as data, not executable code. And even if an attacker tries to inject malicious SQL, the system treats it as plain text, preventing an attack. Apply the principle of least privilege. The database users should only have the minimum permissions they need. If an attacker compromises a low-privilege account, they should not be able to modify or delete critical data. And administrators should use separate accounts for database management rather than application access. Another important defense is validating user input before allowing it to interact with the database. For example, restrict special characters like single quote, double quote, dash dash, and semicolon. Use whitelisting instead of blacklisting. Define exactly what kind of input is allowed. And limit the length of input fields to prevent large SQL payloads. Let's now talk about the grant and revoke permissions. One of the most overlooked aspects of database security is the access control. Organizations must carefully grant and revoke permissions to ensure users only have the access they need. Why is user permission management important? Imagine if a hacker compromises an account, the damage is limited to the permissions of that account. A junior employee should not have the ability to delete entire databases. And only database administrators should have full control over database structure and user management. So, how permissions work in SQL? The SQL databases allow administrators to assign specific permissions using the grant and revoke commands. Example of granting read-only access is like, let's say a bank teller should only be able to view customer account balances but not modify them. We can assign permissions like grant select on customers to teller. Now, the teller can read customer data but cannot modify or delete records. Example of revoking delete privileges. If an employee no longer needs the ability to delete records, we can remove that permission like revoke delete on customers from teller. Best practices for granting permissions are that follow the principle of least privilege, give users only the permissions they need. Regularly review and audit user permissions. And remove access that is no longer needed. And use role-based access control, group users into roles to simplify access management. SQL databases hold the most valuable data in an organization. If they are not properly secured, attackers can steal sensitive customer records, modify financial transactions, or completely wipe out critical business data. That is why organizations must take SQL security seriously. Alright, now let's talk about a different type of database, one that goes beyond the traditional relational model. So far, we have focused on relational databases, where data is stored in tables with rows and columns. That model has worked well for decades, but as technology evolves, so do our data storage needs. Think about the kind of data we work with today. It is not just text and numbers anymore. We now deal with high-resolution images and videos in social media and surveillance systems. Artificial intelligence models that require large datasets and complex processing. And medical scans and biometric records that need advanced storage structures. Traditional relational databases struggle with this kind of complex data. That is why modern applications are turning to object-oriented databases, OODB, and object-relational databases, ORDB. These databases provide more flexibility, but they also come with new security challenges that we need to address. The object-oriented databases, or OODB, are designed to store objects rather than simple tables. Now, what do we mean by objects? If you have ever worked with programming languages like Java or Python, you might know that an object is a self-contained unit of data that includes properties, like a person's name, age, and address, and methods, the functions that allow the object to perform actions. Instead of storing data in rows and columns, OODB store entire objects, including their properties and methods. So, where are OODB used? OODB are perfect for applications that need to store and retrieve complex data types. Some common examples include multimedia applications for storing and managing high-quality images, videos, and audio files. Artificial intelligence and machine learning for managing vast amounts of unstructured data. And biometric authentication, storing fingerprint scans, retina scans, and facial recognition data. How does an object-oriented database work? Let's say we have an employee record in a traditional relational database. In a relational database, an employee's details might be stored in separate tables. But in an object-oriented database, the entire employee record is stored as a single object, including name and age, address and city, even functions like calculate salary. Instead of joining multiple tables, the database retrieves the object as a whole, making data retrieval faster. While OODB offer greater flexibility, they also introduce new security risks that we do not typically see in relational databases. Access control is more complex. One of the biggest security challenges with OODB is inheritance. In object-oriented programming, objects can inherit properties and methods from other objects. This means an attacker who gains access to one object might automatically gain access to related objects. For example, if a hacker compromises an object that stores customer records, they might also gain access to customer payment details, transaction history, and linked accounts. Without strict access control policies, inheritance can expose sensitive data that should remain protected. Data leakage risks. Another risk with OODB is that objects often expose internal methods. In a relational database, users can only see data from tables they are allowed to query. In an OODB, users might accidentally access methods that reveal sensitive information. Imagine an attacker finds a hidden function called getAdminPassword inside an object. In a poorly secured database, they could execute that method and retrieve administrative credentials. That would give them full control over the database, potentially leading to a massive breach. Because OODB store both data and methods, proper security policies are needed to ensure users only access what they are authorized to use. Now, let's talk about object-relational databases, ORDB. ORDB try to blend the best features of relational databases and object-oriented databases. Think of it as a hybrid model that uses relational tables like a traditional database and supports object-oriented features like storing images, fingerprints, and executable functions. Let's say a bank has a customer table in a relational database, but now, the bank wants to store biometric authentication data, like fingerprint scans. In a relational database, this would require a separate table and complicated joins. In an object-relational database, the fingerprint scan can be stored directly as an object inside the customer record. That means that a customer's name and account number are stored in a relational table. And their fingerprint scan is stored as an object inside the same record. This combination of relational and object-oriented storage makes ORDB powerful, but it also introduces security challenges. Security challenges of object-relational databases are hybrid permissions. In an ORDB, some data is stored in relational tables, while other data is stored as objects. That means traditional database permissions may not be enough. Organizations must carefully define who can access relational tables and who can access object data. If permissions are not properly configured, a low-level employee could access customer biometric data that should be restricted. And run unauthorized methods on objects, revealing sensitive details. This makes access control management in ORDB more complicated than in traditional databases. Data consistency issues. In a standard relational database, data consistency is enforced by strict rules. But in an object-relational database, objects can store unstructured data, making validation harder, and execute functions that modify data dynamically. If these processes are not properly monitored, they can lead to data corruption, security loopholes, or unauthorized changes. As technology advances, more organizations are moving towards object-oriented and object-relational databases. These databases provide better support for multimedia and complex data, faster performance for AI and big data applications, and more flexibility than traditional relational databases. However, new security challenges come with these benefits. Organizations must implement strict access controls to prevent unauthorized inheritance. Monitor database methods to prevent data leakage. And regularly audit object storage and execution to maintain security. Alright, let's quickly summarize what we have learned in this lecture. We started by understanding the fundamental role of access control in security. Without it, unauthorized individuals could access sensitive locations, files, and systems, leading to potential breaches, financial losses, and reputational damage. We explored the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability, showing how it forms the foundation of security. Confidentiality ensures that only authorized users access information, integrity keeps data accurate and trustworthy, and availability guarantees that data and systems remain accessible when needed. We also discussed the different access control threats, including unauthorized access, insider threats, social engineering, weak authentication, and malware attacks. We saw how vulnerabilities in a system can lead to real security risks. Next, we covered the different types of access control architectures, centralized and distributed. Centralized access control simplifies management and ensures consistency, but it can become a single point of failure. Distributed access control offers flexibility but can be more challenging to manage. Security policies also play a crucial role in access control. They define who has access, how authentication and authorization are enforced, and how audits and monitoring are conducted. In the next lecture, we will move on to another critical domain, telecommunications and network security. We will explore how networks are protected, the role of firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems, encryption methods, and much more. Before we wrap up, if you found this session valuable, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. And do not forget to leave a comment if you have any feedback or suggestions. See you in the next lecture.